In 1968, as I said, there's Gilbert Shelton, and he's also done some working with him, but now he wants to do his own thing and goes out on his own. He creates his own anthology magazine called Feds and Heads. And he goes it alone, becomes one of the very first self-publishers, and like Jack Jackson did with God's Head, he puts this whole thing together himself, basically prints it at the garage and uses other printing materials or access that he's got at University of Texas as well. And this would become the big, huge launching point of Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers. He brings in Robert Crumb and other friends that he's already worked with at Help Magazine, and eventually ends up moving to Northern California, to San Francisco. And altogether, then now we are starting seeing a huge explosion of what is now going to be considered Underground Comix. So because of the success of Feds and Heads that Gilbert Sheldon has, Robert Crumb decides, hey, that's not a bad idea, I'm going to self-publish my stuff as well. He has, over this time, garnered tons and tons of material that he's able to compile together, and he convinces this small little poster making company for rock band, psychedelic poster company, to help finance and print what is Zap Comics.
Was that Print?
What's that? Print Mint was the company, and then it was just a small little company in San Francisco that just primarily focused on printing psychedelic posters or rock posters for notables as Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Doors. A lot of them, these were like this was the primary company that would print all of their posters to promote their shows at the time. I can get my slide to change. There we go. Because of the success of Gilbert Shelton's Feds and Heads and Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers, they begin to now become an actual full-on publishing company and no longer just self-published. The main difference just being that self-published, you're paying for everything yourself and you're basically putting everything together yourself using whatever equipment you can get your hands on. Well now, because of the success of those, they're able to actually make a real full-on established publication company called Ripoff Press. And again, they're going to pool people that they've worked with over the years together, starting all at the help of Help Magazine. And now we get to 1971 and a little thing called Air Pirate Funnies. This is a collection of spoofs and parodies that maybe I should have had you go get my mom's name, because now I can't remember his name. I feel really bad. Name is Dan Klaus. Dan O'Neill decides to put this little parody comic together. He's had some small little success in Ripoff Press's publications and Zap Comics and stuff like that. But now he wants to do his own comic as well, and he puts out this thing called Air Pirate Funnies. This really almost becomes the end of Underground Comics, because now this gets the attention of Disney, because every single comic strip within Air Pirate Funnies is in one way or another some kind of goof or parody on a Disney franchise. The whole point of this, though, that Dan O'Neill had to begin with, was that he deliberately wanted to attack Disney and deliberately wanted to get, a lot of notoriety from, just attacking them, and he had a lot of animosity and anger for doing some of the work that he did with Disney at the time. And so this was kind of his little middle finger back at them for their treatment of him. Well, this causes a huge problem and ends up causing a lot of problems for Dan O'Neill, who basically has to fight in court for the next 13 years against Disney over the free use and free parody rights, which is one good, amazing thing out of all of this, though, is because of this, it creates tons of new laws because it goes basically all the way up to the California Supreme Court to allow what is now called free use and other fair trade law that allows artists to be able to take properties and do, their own take on them, even though they're another company's intellectual property. But if it's done as a parody or as a goof or basically in any other form of what's considered protest, it really helps establish a lot of really interesting free speech laws because of this. Because the entire concept of this magazine was really his own protest against Disney.
Did they fire him?
He did some small, just cell work animation at the time. He just didn't really, and mostly he saw their work practices, and their pay meant for creatives and everything, and saw that it was a very, unjust company to work for, and it just had really unjust work practices. And so he basically just kind of did this as a little revolt and protest to them. Again, Dan O'Neill ends up spending 13 years fighting Disney over this and never wins. He ends up having to pay out, over the course of these 13 years, millions of dollars, which at the time, we're talking 1970s, a lot of money. Basically ends up bankrupting Dan O'Neill, and he's never able to recuperate after this for a long time. And then 1972, we get a little company called Apex Novelties. There's also another offshoot that helped started by Robert Crumb. And this would be the one thing that was a notable thing. This was kind of just like, they're going back to, they kind of wanted to parodize the cartoon animals, comic strips from the 40s. Like I said, that EC Comics kind of started before they went into the horror genre and all that. This was just kind of like their own little goof and parody on those. But one in particular, animal character, would eventually make quite the splash later on. This is Art Spiegelman's very first interpretation and publication of Mouse, which would eventually obviously become a huge
So did Robert Crumb steal his Fritz the Cat idea from Spiegelman?
The funny thing is like they had been working together for so long since the early 60s, or since the late 50s actually even, that I think they both have agreed that they really both kind of influenced each other over the years of this. And Fritz the Cat really was, I discovered recently, it was really kind of introduced in Help magazine. That was back in 1960. Wasn't Fritz the Cat, but it was just simply this one-page strip that was like 8 panels of this cat basically trying to seduce this female cat. And from that, it just kept, and basically spawned Fritz the Cat. But over the course of years, all these artists really so much fed off of each other that you really couldn't say that each one of them really kind of ripped each other off. If anything, it was more just like influential. And by now we're getting into the later 70s, and guess what? Supposedly the hippies win. The war is over. Nixon's kicked out of office. What is there to parody? What is there to goof on? The Underground Comix, are going through a huge identity crisis at this time because the climate and the culture has shifted so much just in this small little time now. They can't, do more of like a protest or, angry anthems anymore because, like I said, the war is over, Nixon's gone, what are they going to goof on now? So now everything starts getting way more introspective. and you start getting things like American Splendor, and you start getting more things like from Crumb that's far more just like autobiographical instead of animal parodies and stuff like that. Also now, later in the 70s, because, you know, the culture is shifting so much, you start getting more self-published and underground books that are going to focus on fantasy-related works. So you get Wendy and Richard Penny, they established out of Canada Warp Graphics, and
I wouldn't consider those adult books though, because they didn't really have any nudity.
not adults, but definitely underground and self-published works. You know, there's a lot more what this is kind of focusing on too. It's really mostly kind of focused on self-published and underground books that weren't, you know, part of the mainstream books.
Right, because these were really good series of books.
These are amazing, absolutely. I entirely agree. Another fantasy book that comes out at this time is, Dave Sims' Cerebus, which
He's still writing books today.
it is, in fact. And really, Cerebus only ended just, you know, whatever, in 2012 or something like that, right? And went the entire 300 issues that he had planned from his LSD treatment that he had, basically. And he, you know, takes a nice, interesting play on the whole anamorphic animals, you know, kind of trope that was popular in the early 40s comics as well. But he takes it into an entirely unique and interesting level of adulthood, you know, in his writing and narrative. 1980, again, now the hippies are gone, you know, again, the culture is completely shifting, disco is king, and you get into this far more elitism is what I would like to consider it, which would be Raw magazine. And they want to completely drive focus away from the drug-addled, sex-fueled, comics of the heyday of the underground, and they want to be taken a little more seriously. In fact, they want to be taken a lot more seriously, to the point that it's pretentious, I would say.
Is this what spawned like the 2018, like the Judge Dredd thing?
Not so much. Those had already been established starting around 77. This is geared way more to like kind of the National Lampoon crowd, but even more kind of elitist than that. Far more college-educated background and more, really, if anything, what you would almost call like a yuppie comic crowd.